Hello viewers, welcome to the channel and to part 2 of how to reference ranges in macros. If you haven't seen part 1, please check it out as we're going to continue on from where we left off there. As a recap, in Excel, if you do an insert, a delete or a move, in most cases formulas will automatically adjust their references to reflect the changes. But with macros, you need to go through your code and manually change any such references. In part 1, we looked at how we can make this easier by taking the hard-coded columns and rows that are embedded in the code and replacing them with constants that we defined in a central module like this. So Alt F11 will take me to the macro editor. And if you look up here, I've got a module I've named mod global. You can call it whatever you like, and it's separate from the rest of my code that's in this module here. In here we've defined the column letters for our source columns that we're referencing, so employee ID and state. We also have the start row and last row, and we've done the same with the destination sheet as well. So when it comes time to make changes, it's easy to find and easy to change. In part 2, we're going to see how we can make this a little bit more dynamic, in particular with the rows. With columns, they don't tend to change as regularly, but with last rows they do, especially if you have a worksheet that contains source data and it may be updated weekly or fortnightly or whatever frequency it is. Now you don't want to have to keep coming in and changing the last row, especially if you have a number of worksheets with different source data. Not that it's difficult, especially if you followed part 1. It's just that you may forget to do it, or if you hand over to someone else because you've gone on leave, they may forget or they might not even be aware of it. So pop over to Excel. We're going to create 2 formulas. So the start row and the last row. And I like to create them and put them up the top row here. And I usually hide it, but you don't need to. So we don't want to hard code the start row because then it won't change if we insert or delete a column or row, sorry. So instead, we're going to do this. We do a row of the header row. And because it's a reference, if we insert a row or even delete it, it automatically changes. Now the reason I use the header row as the start row and not the first data row is that whenever I refresh data, either manually or via macro, the first thing I typically do is delete the existing data. Now if we reference the first row here as the start row, if you delete it, you'll end up with a ref error. Now if you do need in your macro or even in formulas to just get the data and exclude the header, you can always do the header row +1. Now with the last row, we don't want to do the same thing because we don't know what the last row is going to be. So if we did do this, if you insert a row, it'll update because it's before it, which is correct. However, if we added a row below it, it doesn't update, and this one, which is the formula we're going to use, does. And then the other reason, as already mentioned before, is if we deleted our data, we would get a ref error. Alright, so we're not going to do that. We're going to use the lookup formula. Now this is a common way of getting the last row in Excel, so I'm not going to take any credit for it. However, the way I use it in my formulas and in macros to make them dynamic, I think is unique. So let's take a look at the formula. It's going to look for the value 2 inside this vector or this array, and I'll come back to 2 and 1 in a moment. Now the b not equal to blank is going to return true for all non-blank rows in column B and false for all blank ones. So if we highlight from B to the second double quote as I've done there and press F9, you'll see all the values. Hold Control and press Home to take you to the top, and you can see that the values have been inserted in place of that B not equal to blank. So the first row where the formula exists is not blank, so we have a true, then we have a blank row, and then we have our header, and then all the data, and eventually we have all these blank rows. Now hit escape, or if you hit enter, it will retain those values. You can always do an undo if you did accidentally. So each one of those trues and false will be divided into 1. So true is treated as 1 and false is treated as 0. So you're going to get a series of 1s and errors, or div 0. And again, just highlight from 1 all the way to the bracket there and press F9. Control, Home, and you can see we have 1, so for the actual formula row, then we have a blank, div 0, then we have a series of 1s where our data is, and then the rest are all blank, so we have div 0. Again, hit escape. Now the lookup is going to search for the value 2 inside of those 1s and div 0s. It's going to ignore the errors, and it's not going to find a 2. And so the way the lookup works is it returns the last value that is less than the lookup value, in this case 2. And so since we only have 1s, it's going to return the last 1, which happens to be our last non-blank row. Now we want to return the row number, and so we do row of column B, and that will give us our row. Now, key thing to note is when you're using this formula is to pick a column where whenever you do have data, that column will always have a value in it. So if we've selected employee ID, but sometimes you can have a blank, if the last row happens to be blank, then that formula is going to return the row before it. So you'd need to pick another column. If you don't have one which is always going to have a value in it, then perhaps a combination of 2. Perhaps if you don't have employee ID, you'll always have a name. So in that case, you could do a lookup of that column as well, and then just do a max of the 2, and you use that one instead. Okay, so how do we get these in our macros? Well, we don't want to reference B1 or C1, because if we inserted a column, then we'll have to go and change the macro in order to pick up the correct cells. So instead what we're going to do, we're going to define named ranges for each of those 2 cells. So click on the cell, and in the top left here where you normally see the cell reference, we're going to type a name. I've already done this, and I like to call it, prefix it with an acronym of the worksheet. So SRC for source _ header. You don't need to have the underscore. I just like to do that. You can pick your own naming convention, and then hit enter. And do the same with our last row. You can also create them by clicking on formulas up the top, and then name manager, and in here you can see ones that I've already defined. You can create new ones, you can delete or even edit existing ones. So now that we have the name range for the source, we're going to do the same for the destination, but we're just going to create the start row one. Unhide here again, equals row 3, and give it a named range up here, and I've called it dest _ header. All right, now we have our named ranges. One thing I should point out, if you are going to make this visible, or even if you aren't, I would suggest putting a comment here to say used by macro, don't delete, something like that. The reason being, if you were to click on this one, let's say, and go to formulas up the top and check its dependents, it's going to say there are no dependents, unless if you are referencing this from other formulas. In this case, I'm not. So someone might come and delete it, but that's going to affect the macro. All right, let's go to the macro and see how we can access these named ranges. Again, Alt F11. All right, I'm going to go to my code here. Now, this is what we finished off with in part 1. What we're going to do, we're going to leave the columns alone. So these are the constants. We want to replace the constants for the start row and the last row of the source and destination. I'm just going to copy this down to the subroutine below that I've already prepared. Yeah, just paste it here. And now we're going to go through, this is the code to get the named range. So we can plug in the rows. We first define some variables for the source start row, last row, and the destination start row. You can name them whatever you like, but just try and keep something consistent. So with the start row, the source start row here, we want to use the source sheet. Again, this is using the code name, which I mentioned in part 1. If you have not really familiar with it, please check out my other video on how to reference worksheets as I go into detail there. But this is essentially the same as doing worksheets and sheet 1 for the source and sheet 2 for the destination. So source, range, and this is the constant for our name range. Now you could just put the name range here. So this is the name that we gave it in Excel. However, I prefer to use constants because if we use this elsewhere in our code and the name range ever changes, you'd have to change it in all instances. All right, so as I mentioned in part 1, just click anywhere inside that constant, hold Shift and press F2, and it takes you to its definition. So we have public const, the constant name as string, and the name range we gave it in Excel. And I like to give the constant name the same as the actual named range, but prefix it with NR for name range underscore. Again, you can choose your own naming convention. So I've created one for the source header, source last row, and the destination header. Let's go back to our code. Then we're going to get our source last row, similar fashion to the source start row, except we just use the last row constant here. I'll come back to this in a moment. And then we get our destination start row. Just be careful, make sure you're using your destination sheet, range, and the constant for the destination header name range. So now we got our values for each of those rows. We're going to go and replace these here in the code. So you can just type in the name. Since I've named them almost identical except the underscore, I can just delete the underscore, and when I move away, it automatically replaces it with the defined variable name, but you could just type it out. So we've got source last row, and we want to do the same with the destination, and same with the state. This is where we copy our state and the last row and our destination. Now I just want to come back to this line of code here. This is a different way of getting the last row by using the find function. There are other ways of doing it. Each have their own pros and cons, but I'm going to be talking about that in a different video. This is what I used to use. This was my preferred way. However, I've now migrated to doing it using the named range approach. All right, so we haven't moved the data around. We're just going to show you what it does by default. It's going to copy employee ID column from the header down and the state from the header down. It's complete. Let's Alt Tab and let's have a look at the destination. So we've got employee ID down to the bottom, state down to the bottom. And I'm just going to clear this, ready for the next run. So what we're going to do now is we're going to insert a row here because the user wants to see today's date up here, for example. So our start row has moved to 4. Our last row is now 14. I can even add some data here. So let's go Susie, Queensland, Will, and Victoria. All right. So without changing any code, this should still copy our employee ID down and our state down. Go back to our macro, and we can run this by clicking anywhere inside the subroutine, clicking F5 or the play button up the top. Okay, it's run. Let's go to our destination sheet, and we've copied all the way down, including the new data. We can take this a bit further, and perhaps I'll do another video for that, depending on how many people are interested in it. If you are, please post it in the comment. But essentially what you can do is create named ranges for the columns, and that way we don't have to have column letters defined in the constants. We can go even a step further than that and create dynamic named ranges that just span the header down to the last row, whatever that may be. We could also exclude the header if we wanted to. And then our macro only needs to get the named range and copy it. We don't need to specify the start or end. Anyway, that's for another video. If you have any comments or questions, please post them below. Thank you for watching. If you found this useful, please hit the like button, and we'll see you on the next video.